The morning sun cast long shadows across the Galactic Military Academy's training grounds as Instructor Zethka adjusted his secondary breathing apparatus. The four-armed Kithran officer stood nearly 3 meters tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the artificial atmosphere dome that protected the mixed-species facility. Around him, 24 of the galaxy's finest military instructors prepared for what many considered the most challenging assignment in their careers, training the first human cadet ever admitted to the Academy. Captain Sarah Chun stepped off the transport shuttle, her regulation black boots making contact with the metallic deck plating. At 5 feet 6 inches tall, she appeared almost comically small compared to the towering alien figures observing her arrival. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her brown eyes swept across the assembly of instructors with the calculating gaze of someone who had survived 3 tours in humanity's recent conflicts with the Hegemony Coalition. The humans had only made contact with galactic civilization 18 months ago, and their reputation preceded them like a shockwave through civilized space. Stories of their impossible endurance, their refusal to surrender even when facing certain death, and their disturbing tendency to find creative solutions to problems that should have been insurmountable had spread from system to system. Most species viewed them with a mixture of fascination and terror. Instructor Vashti, a serpentine naga whose species had dominated galactic military doctrine for over a millennium, slithered forward to address the human. Her scales shifted color from deep blue to a cautious yellow-green as she spoke through her translator device. Cadet Chun, welcome to the Galactic Military Academy. I am Senior Instructor Vashti. You should know that in the 700 years this institution has existed, we have never had a student fail to complete our program due to physical limitations. However, given your species' recent emergence onto the galactic stage and unique physiological characteristics, we have prepared modified training protocols. Sarah's expression remained neutral as she listened, but several instructors noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. She had read the Academy's files during her 3-week journey to the facility. She knew what they thought of humans, primitive death-worlders who compensated for their physical inadequacies through reckless aggression and an inability to recognize when they were beaten. With respect, Instructor Vashti, Sarah replied, her voice carrying clearly across the assembly area. I didn't request any modifications to the training protocols. I'm here to complete the same program as any other cadet. A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the gathering of instructors. Zethka's mandibles clicked together in the Kithran equivalent of a chuckle. These humans were certainly confident he would give them that. Confidence, however, rarely translated to survival when facing an Exor-high battle cub in single combat. The Academy's training program was designed to push cadets from every known species to their absolute limits. Physical conditioning, tactical analysis, xenobiology, stellar navigation, and, most importantly, the practical application of combat skills against live opponents. The final test of the first phase involved facing a juvenile Exor-high in hand-to-hand combat. The Exor-high were the galaxy's apex predators, standing nearly 12 feet tall at maturity, with bone-crushing jaws and reflexes that made them virtually unbeatable in close combat. Even their juveniles, standing only 8 feet tall, possessed strength that could snap most beings in half. No cadet had ever been seriously injured during these encounters, primarily because the Academy's safety protocols involved multiple instructors with advanced stunning weapons positioned around the combat arena. The moment a cadet was in genuine danger, the exercise would be terminated. Most cadets from less physically robust species lasted perhaps 30 seconds before requiring intervention. Dr. Helix 9, the Academy's synthetic medical officer, approached Sarah with datapad in hand. The artificial being's optical sensors glowed a soft blue as it scanned the human's vital signs. Cadet Chun, I have been reviewing the physiological data your species provided. According to these readings, humans possess several unusual characteristics. Your bone density is significantly higher than most species. Your muscle fiber composition suggests remarkable endurance capabilities, and your cardiovascular system appears designed for extended periods of high-stress activity. However, your lack of natural armor, claws, or enhanced strength places you at a significant disadvantage against most galactic fauna. Sarah nodded politely. I understand the concerns, Dr. Helix 9. My species has survived on Earth by adapting and learning, not by being the strongest or fastest. I'm confident those same principles will serve me well here. The Academy's commandant, Fleet Admiral Karath of the massive, tank-like Bruggen species, lumbered forward. His voice rumbled like an avalanche as he addressed the human directly. Cadet Chun, your species' recent victories against the Hegemony Coalition were impressive. However, Academy training is different from actual warfare. Here, you cannot rely on the creative tactics and technological advantages that serve humanity so well in those conflicts. You will be tested on fundamental military skills that every officer in the Galactic Fleet must master. Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into the Academy's rigorous training regimen. The academic coursework proved challenging, but manageable. She excelled in tactical analysis and xenobiology, performed adequately in stellar navigation, and struggled somewhat with the advanced mathematics required for faster-than-light calculations. Her instructors noted that she had an unusual tendency to approach problems from unexpected angles, often arriving at correct solutions through methods that violated conventional wisdom. The physical training was where most instructors expected her to falter. The Academy's obstacle courses were designed for species with natural advantages. Kithrans who could use 4 arms simultaneously, Nagas who could slither through spaces too small for bipedal beings, and Bruggens whose massive strength allowed them to simply smash through barriers that required more finesse from other species. Sarah's approach surprised everyone. Rather than attempting to match the natural advantages of other species, she focused on identifying weaknesses in each course design. When facing a climbing wall that favored multi-limbed species, she used her smaller size to find handholds that others overlooked. When confronting barriers designed to be smashed through, she discovered structural weak points that allowed her to topple them with minimal force. Instructor Zethka found himself paying particular attention to the human cadet. During his centuries of service, he had trained thousands of officers from dozens of species. Most followed predictable patterns based on their evolutionary advantages. Humans, it seemed, had no such patterns. Sarah's solutions to training challenges were so unconventional that other instructors had to modify course designs multiple times to prevent her from exploiting what they considered design flaws. The social dynamics among cadets proved equally interesting. Sarah was the only representative of her species, making her a curiosity among her peers. Most maintained a respectful distance, uncertain how to interact with someone from a species known for its unpredictable and often violent responses to threats. A few attempted to befriend her, drawn perhaps by the novelty of her presence. Cadet Vex, 12, a young synthetic, proved particularly fascinated by human behavior. During evening study sessions, it would pepper Sarah with questions about human culture, psychology, and military doctrine. Sarah answered patiently, though she sometimes seemed amused by the synthetic's clinical approach to understanding what it termed organic irrationality. Cadet Chun, Vex, 12 inquired during one such session. Our databases indicate that humans frequently make decisions that prioritize the welfare of others over their own survival. This behavior pattern appears contrary to evolutionary logic. How do you explain this contradiction? Sarah looked up from her stellar navigation homework, considering the question. I suppose it depends on how you define survival, Vex 12. Sometimes the survival of the group requires individuals to take risks. Sometimes preserving certain values is more important than preserving individual lives. My species learned long ago that our strength comes from working together, not from being individually superior. This conversation was overheard by several other cadets, and word of the humans' response spread quickly through the academy. Many found her explanation puzzling, while others found it somehow disturbing. The idea that a species might willingly sacrifice individual advantage for collective benefit challenged assumptions about natural behavior that had guided galactic civilization for millennia. As the weeks progressed toward the first major combat evaluation, tension began building throughout the academy. Instructors debated among themselves about how to handle the situation if the human cadet proved unable to survive the encounter with the HFY Cub. Stunning weapons were tested and retested. Emergency medical procedures were reviewed. Some suggested that the test should be modified or waived entirely for the human cadet. Admiral Karath rejected all such suggestions. The Academy has maintained its standards for 7 centuries, he declared during a staff meeting. We will not lower those standards for any species, regardless of their apparent limitations. The human chose to attend without modifications to our program. She will be tested under the same conditions as every other cadet. Dr. Helix 9 raised a concern that had been troubling the medical staff. Admiral, our projections suggest that even with our fastest intervention, the probability of serious injury or death for Cadet Chen exceeds acceptable parameters. Perhaps we should consider using a younger cub or implementing additional safety measures. Negative, Karath replied firmly. The HFY Cub selected for this evaluation is the same one used for all first-phase combat tests. It is properly trained and conditioned. Our safety protocols have proven adequate for over 1,000 previous evaluations. The test will proceed as scheduled. 3 days before the combat evaluation, Sarah made an unusual request. She asked permission to observe previous recordings of cadet encounters with the HFY Cub. This request was highly irregular, as most cadets preferred to enter the test without preconceptions about what they would face. However, no regulation prohibited such observation, and permission was granted. Sarah spent hours in the Academy's archives, watching dozens of recordings from different species encounters with the cub. She observed how Kithrans attempted to use their forearms to grapple with the creature, how Nagas tried to use their speed to strike and retreat, and how Brugans attempted to match the cub's strength with their own considerable mass. In every case, the pattern was the same. Initial contact, a brief struggle, and then instructor intervention as the cub gained the upper hand. What interested Sarah most were the moments immediately before instructor intervention. In each case, there seemed to be a brief pause, a moment when the cub's attention shifted from the cadet to something else in the environment. She made careful notes about these moments, though she shared her observations with no one. The night before the test, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, reviewing everything she had learned about HFY biology and behavior. The creatures were indeed formidable predators, but like all natural beings, they had evolved specific patterns of behavior that served them well in their natural environment. The question was whether those same patterns could be understood and perhaps redirected in an artificial environment like the Academy's combat arena. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah reflected on the conversations she had overheard among instructors over the past few weeks. Most seemed to view the upcoming test as an unfortunate necessity, a required demonstration of human inadequacy that would likely result in injury or humiliation. A few appeared genuinely concerned for her safety. None seemed to consider the possibility that she might actually succeed in the encounter. Sarah had survived 3 tours of duty in conflicts where human forces faced seemingly impossible odds against technologically superior enemies. She had learned that survival often depended less on individual superiority than on the ability to understand and exploit weaknesses in apparently invincible systems. The Academy's instructors saw the HFY Cub as an unstoppable force of nature. Sarah saw it as another problem to be solved. The morning of the combat evaluation arrived with typical Academy precision. Sarah woke at her usual time, completed her normal physical conditioning routine, and ate a standard breakfast. Her vital signs, monitored continuously by Dr. Helix 9's medical sensors, showed no elevation in stress hormones or other indicators of anxiety. This itself was puzzling to the medical staff, as most cadets showed significant physiological stress responses before their combat evaluation. As Sarah made her way to the combat arena, she passed groups of instructors and fellow cadets who watched her with expressions ranging from sympathy to morbid curiosity. Word of the test had spread throughout the academy, and many had come to witness what they assumed would be a brief and conclusive demonstration of human physical limitations. The combat arena was a circular space 50 meters in diameter, surrounded by reinforced transparent barriers that allowed clear observation while containing the action within. Instructor Zethka checked and rechecked the positioning of stunning weapons around the arena's perimeter. Dr. Helix 9 monitored medical sensors and emergency intervention systems. Admiral Karath observed from the command platform, his massive frame motionless as stone. At precisely 0900 hours, the arena's entry portal opened, and Sarah Chun stepped inside. Sarah stepped into the arena with measured steps, her regulation combat boots making soft impacts against the reinforced floor plating. The circular space felt larger than it had appeared from the observation areas, but she had expected that. Adrenaline always played tricks with perception. She moved to the center of the arena and stood at ease, hands clasped behind her back, while her eyes swept the perimeter in a systematic pattern that her instructors had come to recognize as distinctly human. The observation gallery above buzzed with quiet conversations in a dozen different languages. Translator devices hummed as species shared their predictions about the coming encounter. Most conversations centered on how quickly the human would require intervention, with estimates ranging from immediate assistance to perhaps 45 seconds if she proved particularly elusive. Instructor Vashti's scales had shifted to a deep purple, indicating significant stress. Despite her earlier confidence in the Academy's safety protocols, she found herself troubled by the human cadet's unusual calm. Most species showed clear physiological signs of stress before facing an X or high, even in a controlled environment. Elevated heart rates, increased respiration, stress pheromone release, or, at minimum, defensive posturing. Sarah Chun displayed none of these normal responses. Medical readings? Admiral Karath inquired, his gravelly voice cutting through the ambient conversation. Dr. Helix 9 consulted its data displays with mechanical precision. Heart rate 72 beats per minute. Respiration normal. Stress hormones within baseline parameters. Admiral, these readings are highly unusual. Either human physiology responds to threat differently than our models predict, or Cadet Chun has achieved a level of emotional control that exceeds documented parameters for organic beings. Zethka positioned himself at the primary stunning weapon control station. His 4 arms moved independently as he ran final systems checks, but his compound eyes remained fixed on the small human figure in the arena center. During his centuries of military service, he had learned to recognize certain qualities in soldiers that transcended species boundaries. Courage could be taught, discipline could be instilled, but there existed certain intangibles that separated exceptional warriors from merely competent ones. Something in the human's posture suggested she possessed those intangibles in abundance. A soft chime indicated the beginning of the evaluation phase. Across the arena from Sarah's position, a reinforced portal began to iris open. The sound of heavy breathing and occasional low growls echoed from the darkness beyond. Several spectators involuntarily stepped back from the observation barriers, though the transparent aluminum could easily withstand a direct assault from a mature Exor High, let alone a juvenile. The Exor High cub emerged slowly from its holding area, massive head swaying as it assessed the new environment. Standing 8 feet tall at the shoulder, its muscled frame rippled beneath midnight black fur marked with a silver striping that would develop into full camouflage patterns at maturity. Its eyes, each the size of a human fist, glowed with predatory intelligence as they swept the arena before focusing on the small bipedal figure at its center. Sarah remained motionless as the cub completed its initial assessment. She had studied hours of recordings, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer presence of the creature. Every instinct her species had developed over millions of years of evolution screamed warnings about the apex predator now sharing her environment. Her heart rate increased slightly, but remained well within normal parameters for moderate physical activity. The cub began its approach with a methodical patience that made HFY such effective hunters. Rather than rushing directly toward its target, it moved in a gradually tightening spiral, testing the arena boundaries while maintaining constant visual contact with Sarah. This behavior was well documented. HFY prefer to understand their environment before committing to an attack, and the cub had been trained to follow these natural patterns even in artificial settings. In the observation gallery, Instructor Vashti found herself holding her breath as the spiral tightened. Every previous cadet had shown clear signs of distress by this point. Some had attempted to maintain distance from the approaching predator. Others had tried to intimidate it with displays of their own species' threat behaviors. A few had even attempted premature attacks, hoping to strike before the cub could respond effectively. Sarah did something none of them had ever seen before. She slowly lowered herself into a sitting position, cross-legged on the arena floor, and closed her eyes. A shocked silence fell over the observation gallery. Several instructors reached for their intervention controls before Admiral Karatha's commanding gesture stopped them. Dr. Helix 9's sensors registered a further decrease in the human stress indicators as she settled into what appeared to be a meditative posture. The HFY cub paused in its approach, head tilted in confusion. Its hunting instincts were finely tuned to respond to specific behavioral cues from potential prey. Flight responses triggered chase reflexes, threat displays activated dominance behaviors, and defensive postures prompted assessment of target capabilities. Sitting calmly with closed eyes fit none of these evolutionary programs. For several minutes, predator and human remained motionless in a tableau that challenged everything the Academy's instructors thought they understood about interspecies combat dynamics. The cub circled Sarah's position twice more, but each circuit brought it no closer to understanding the unusual behavior it was witnessing. "What is she doing?" whispered Cadet Vex, 12, to a nearby Kithran student. The synthetics optical sensors remained fixed on the arena floor, recording everything but comprehending little of what it observed. The Kithran's response came through its translator with unusual uncertainty. "I believe she is demonstrating what humans call patience, but I do not understand the tactical application in this context." In the arena, Sarah opened her eyes and spoke in a calm, conversational tone that carried clearly through the arena's audio systems. "Hello there. You're quite impressive, aren't you?" She made no sudden movements, but slowly extended one hand in a gesture that would have been recognized on Earth as an invitation for a nervous animal to approach. The cub's ears swiveled toward the sound of her voice, but its body remained coiled for instant action. HFY possessed excellent hearing and were capable of learning vocal patterns, though they rarely encountered prey that attempted communication rather than flight or fight responses. "I know you're confused," Sarah continued, her voice maintaining the same calm, almost soothing quality. "You're trained to hunt, but I'm not behaving like prey, am I? That must be frustrating. Your instincts are telling you one thing, but your intelligence is telling you something else." Several instructors exchanged glances of growing amazement. Interspecies communication during combat evaluation was not explicitly prohibited, primarily because no cadet had ever attempted it. The Academy's protocols covered every conceivable combat scenario except the possibility that a cadet might try to establish dialogue with their opponent. The cub took a tentative step closer, then another. Its head remained low, ready to strike if the small creature made any threatening movements, but curiosity was beginning to override hunting instincts. In its natural environment, HFY were ambush predators who relied on surprise and overwhelming force to bring down prey. Extended observation of potential targets was rare and usually indicated prey too dangerous to attack safely. Sarah slowly stood, her movements telegraphed well in advance, and free of any gesture that might trigger predatory responses. "You're very intelligent, aren't you? I can see it in your eyes. You're trying to figure out what I am, what I represent. That's good. Intelligence is what keeps us all alive." The cub was now within 6 meters of Sarah's position, close enough to cover the distance in a single bound if it chose to attack. Its muscles remained coiled for instant action, but its head had risen slightly from the low hunting posture it had maintained since entering the arena. In the observation gallery, Dr. Helix 9 was recording unprecedented physiological data from both participants. The human stress indicators had actually decreased since the cub's approach began, while biosensors monitoring the XOR high showed patterns consistent with curiosity rather than active hunting behavior. Admiral Dr. Helix 9 reported quietly, "I am observing behavioral patterns from the cub that do not match any recorded evaluation scenarios. It appears to be transitioning from hunting mode to social investigation mode. This should not be possible in an arena environment with an unknown creature." Admiral Karatha's massive frame leaned forward as he studied the scene below. In his centuries of military service, he had witnessed countless examples of tactical innovation and battlefield improvisation. What he was observing now transcended mere tactics. The human cadet was demonstrating an understanding of predator psychology that challenged fundamental assumptions about interspecies interaction. Sarah took a small step to her left, the movement slow and obviously non-threatening. The cub's eyes tracked her motion, but it made no move to intercept or respond aggressively. She was now positioned slightly off-center from where she had been sitting, and the cub had unconsciously adjusted its own position to maintain the same relative distance. "See, we can share this space," Sarah said, taking another careful step. "You don't have to hurt me to prove you're stronger. I already know you're stronger. You're faster, too, and your natural weapons are far superior to anything I possess. But strength and speed aren't the only tools available to intelligent beings, are they?" The cub's posture continued to relax as Sarah's movements established a predictable pattern. She was circling slowly around the arena's perimeter, and it began following at the same cautious distance. To outside observers, it appeared almost as if she was taking the massive predator for a walk. Instructor Zethka found his grip on the stunning weapon controls relaxing as minutes passed without any sign of impending violence. His military experience had taught him to recognize moments when combat situations transformed into something else entirely. The human cadet had somehow shifted the entire dynamic of the encounter from predator-prey interaction to something resembling mutual assessment. "How is this possible?" Instructor Vashti asked, her scales shifting through a rapid spectrum of colors indicating intense confusion. The cub is trained to engage in combat scenarios. Its conditioning should override any tendency towards social interaction with unknown species. Admiral Karatha's response rumbled with something approaching admiration. The cub's conditioning assumes normal prey responses. What we are witnessing is decidedly not normal. The human has identified a gap in the creature's behavioral programming and is exploiting it with remarkable skill. Sarah had completed one full circuit of the arena with the cub, maintaining its respectful distance. She paused and turned to face the creature directly for the first time since the encounter began. The cub froze, muscles tensing as its hunting instincts responded to the change in posture. But Sarah's next action defused the tension before it could escalate. She sat down again, this time facing the cub directly, and resumed her calm, conversational tone. "You know what I think? I think you're bored. This isn't much of a challenge for you, is it? Following academy protocols, facing cadets who respond predictably to your presence. Where's the excitement in that?" The cub tilted its head, an unmistakably curious gesture that sent ripples of amazement through the observation gallery. Dr. Helix 9's sensors detected increasing neural activity in the creature's frontal cortex, areas associated with problem-solving and complex reasoning rather than instinctive hunting behaviors. "I have a proposal," Sarah continued. "Instead of this being about whether you can overpower me, which we both know you can, what if we made it about whether you can solve a puzzle? Humans love puzzles. Maybe XOR do too." She reached slowly into her utility belt and withdrew a small object that had been part of her standard equipment loadout. It was a simple mechanical puzzle, 3 interlocking metal rings that required specific manipulation to separate. She held it up where the cub could see it clearly. This is called a puzzle ring. It's designed to challenge manual dexterity and spatial reasoning. On Earth, we use them to keep our minds sharp during long space voyages. I wonder if your claws are precise enough to manipulate something this delicate. She placed the puzzle on the ground between herself and the cub, then moved back several meters to give the creature room to investigate. The cub approached cautiously, sniffing the unfamiliar object before using one massive claw to carefully nudge it. The metal rings chimed softly as they moved, a sound that seemed to capture the cub's complete attention. It nudged the puzzle again, this time more deliberately, and watched as the rings shifted into a new configuration. Over the next several minutes, the 8-foot predator became completely absorbed in manipulating the small puzzle, its earlier aggressive postures forgotten. In the observation gallery, a profound silence had fallen as instructors and cadets witnessed something unprecedented in the Academy's history. A HFY cub, bred and trained for combat evaluation, was playing with a toy under the guidance of a human cadet who had somehow transformed a life-or-death encounter into an impromptu lesson in interspecies communication. "I believe, Dr. Helix," 9 announced quietly, "that we are witnessing the development of an entirely new approach to xenobiological interaction protocols." Admiral Karath nodded slowly, his massive frame motionless as he processed the implications of what he was observing. "Indeed, and I suspect this is only the beginning of what this human will teach us about our own assumptions." 20 minutes had passed since the evaluation began, and the HFY cub was still engrossed with the puzzle rings. Sarah watched patiently as the massive creature manipulated the interlocking metal circles with surprising delicacy. Each successful movement of the rings produced a soft chime that seemed to delight the cub, whose tail had begun swaying in what she recognized as a contentment display from her xenobiology studies. The observation gallery had filled beyond capacity as word spread throughout the academy. Instructors from other departments, off-duty cadets, and even maintenance staff had gathered to witness what would undoubtedly become the most discussed evaluation in the institution's history. The usual quiet murmur of academic observation had been replaced by an electric silence as everyone struggled to process what they were seeing. Dr. Helix, 9 continued recording unprecedented biometric data from both participants. The cub's stress hormones had dropped to levels typically associated with play behavior, while Sarah's remained steady in what could only be described as a meditative state. Most remarkably, the cub's neural activity showed patterns indicating active learning, as if it was genuinely engaging with the puzzle as an intellectual challenge rather than simply manipulating an interesting object. Admiral Karath had been joined on the command platform by Academy Dean Threxenel, whose species the Veilfins prided themselves on their analytical capabilities. The Dean's 6 eyes tracked every movement in the arena, while his secondary brain processed probability matrices for dozens of potential outcomes. "Admiral, in my estimation, this scenario has exceeded all predictable parameters," Dean Threxenel communicated through rapid clicks that his translator converted to standard galactic. The statistical probability of an HFY cub exhibiting sustained non-aggressive behavior toward an unknown species in an arena environment was calculated as approximately 0.03%. Yet here we are. The Admiral's response rumbled with grudging respect. "The human appears to understand something about predator psychology that we have overlooked in 7 centuries of training protocols. She has identified that intelligence can override instinct when properly stimulated." In the arena, the cub had successfully separated one ring from the interlock set and was now examining it closely. Sarah smiled and offered gentle encouragement. "Excellent work. You're much better at this than most humans on their first attempt. The secret is understanding how the pieces want to move rather than forcing them into position." The cub's response was a low rumble that Sarah's xenobiology training identified as an HFY vocalization associated with positive emotional states. It was a sound that none of the Academy's instructors had ever heard during an evaluation, primarily because contentment was not an emotion typically associated with combat scenarios. Sarah stood slowly and approached the cub's position, her movements telegraphed and non-threatening. The creature looked up from its puzzle, but showed no signs of returning to hunting behavior. If anything, it seemed pleased to have her closer, as if seeking approval for its puzzle-solving accomplishments. "May I show you something else?" Sarah asked, settling into a sitting position about 3 meters from the cub. She reached into her utility kit and withdrew another small object, this one a simple wooden carving in the shape of a bird that she had crafted during her journey to the academy. The cub's eyes fixed on the new object with immediate interest. Sarah held it up where the creature could see it clearly. "This is called art. Humans create objects like this not because they serve any practical function, but because the process of creation gives us pleasure. We call it expressing creativity." She placed the wooden bird on the ground between them and gestured for the cub to investigate. The creature approached cautiously, sniffing the carved wood before gently touching it with one claw. The delicate nature of its investigation suggested an understanding that this object required careful handling. In the observation gallery, Instructor Vashti found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about combat evaluation protocols. Her serpentine form had shifted from the rigid posture of professional alertness to something approaching fascination as she watched the interplay between human and predator. "She's teaching it," Vashti murmured to Instructor Zethka. "The human is actually conducting an education session with an XOR high cub in the middle of a combat evaluation." Zethka's mandibles clicked in agreement. "More than that, she's demonstrating that the concepts of education and combat are not mutually exclusive. The cub is learning, but so are we. This human is showing us possibilities we never considered." The wooden bird carving seemed to captivate the cub even more than the puzzle rings. It carefully lifted the object in one massive claw and brought it closer to its eyes for detailed examination. Sarah watched with obvious pleasure as the creature explored the carved details with growing excitement. "Do you see how the grain of the wood follows the shape?" Sarah asked conversationally. "I carved this to work with the natural patterns, not against them. Humans have learned that working with nature's existing strengths often produces better results than trying to impose our will through force alone." The cub made another contented rumble and gently set the carving down before looking directly at Sarah. For the first time since the evaluation began, there was clear communication happening between the two beings, though it transcended anything that could be captured by language translators. What happened next surprised even Sarah. The cub moved to the center of the arena and began using its claws to scratch patterns in the floor plating. The marks were deliberate and controlled, clearly not random scratches, but purposeful marks arranged in geometric patterns. Within minutes, it had created a crude but recognizable representation of the puzzle rings. A collective gasp rippled through the observation gallery. Several instructors reached for their recording devices to document what appeared to be the first recorded instance of an XOR high engaging in representational art. Dr. Helix 9's sensors detected massive spikes in the creature's creative processing centers, brain regions that most xenobiologists had assumed were vestigial in predatory species. Sarah clapped her hands softly in appreciation. "That's beautiful. You understand the concept perfectly. Art is about sharing what you see and feel with others. You've just created your first artwork." The cub's response was a series of complex vocalizations that went far beyond the simple contentment rumbles it had been making. Dr. Helix 9's linguistic analysis systems identified patterns suggesting rudimentary attempts at mimicking human vocal ranges, though the creature's vocal apparatus was clearly not designed for such sounds. Admiral Karoth leaned forward as the implications of what he was witnessing began to crystallize. "Dean Threxenel, are we observing the emergence of spontaneous artistic expression in an XOR high?" The Dean's analytical capabilities were being pushed to their limits as he processed the unprecedented data stream. "Admiral, if my observations are correct, this cub has not only engaged in artistic creation, but has done so in response to human instruction. This suggests cognitive flexibility that exceeds our documented parameters for the species by several orders of magnitude." In the arena, Sarah had produced a small pad and stylus from her kit and was sketching the cub's floor artwork. The creature watched with intense interest as she captured its creation in a permanent medium. When she finished, she showed the sketch to the cub, who examined it with what could only be described as pride. "Now you have a record of your first artwork," Sarah explained. "Humans believe that creativity should be preserved and shared. Would you like to create something else?" The cub's enthusiasm was unmistakable as it began working on a new pattern in a different section of the arena floor. This time, the design was more complex, incorporating curved lines that suggested movement and flow rather than the geometric precision of its first attempt. Sarah watched with fascination as the creature experimented with different techniques, sometimes scratching deeply for bold lines and sometimes barely marking the surface for subtle details. The transformation in the arena's atmosphere was complete. What had begun as a standard combat evaluation had evolved into something unprecedented, an interspecies art class conducted between a human cadet and an apex predator. The educational implications were staggering, but the immediate impact on everyone present was even more profound. Cadet Vex, 12, had been recording everything with mechanical precision, but now found its processing systems struggling to categorize the experience. Cadet Shun has successfully established communication, cooperation, and now artistic collaboration with the HFY cub. These achievements suggest that the barriers between species may be far more permeable than our databases indicate. The evaluation's scheduled time limit had passed without anyone noticing. Standard protocol called for the exercise to conclude after 30 minutes, but no instructor was willing to interrupt what had become a historic moment in interspecies relations. The cub showed no signs of reverting to aggressive behavior, and Sarah appeared completely comfortable in her continuing interaction with a massive predator. As the cub worked on its second artwork, Sarah began humming softly, a simple melody that she had learned as a child on Earth. The creature's ears swiveled toward the sound, and after several minutes of listening, it began producing vocalizations that seemed to follow the rhythm of her melody. The sounds were nothing like music as most species understood it, but there was an unmistakable pattern and intentionality to the HFY's vocal responses. "She's teaching it to sing," breathed instructor Vashti, her scales shifting through colors that indicated wonder rather than stress for the first time since the evaluation began. The implications were staggering. If a human cadet could successfully establish artistic and musical communication with an HFY cub in less than an hour, what did that suggest about the possibilities for interspecies cooperation throughout the galaxy? Every military doctrine, every diplomatic protocol, every assumption about the fundamental nature of species interaction would need to be reconsidered. Admiral Karath made a decision that would be debated in military academies for generations to come. Rather than ending the evaluation, he authorized its extension indefinitely. "This has become something far more important than a combat test," he announced to the assembled observers. "We are witnessing the emergence of an entirely new paradigm for interspecies interaction. Documentation of this process takes precedence over all standard protocols." In the arena, Sarah and the cub had moved beyond individual activities to collaborative creation. Together, they were working on a large floor pattern that combined human geometric principles with HFY flowing designs. Sarah would suggest modifications using gentle gestures, and the cub would incorporate her ideas while adding its own innovations. The pattern they were creating was unlike anything in the artistic traditions of any known species. It possessed a dynamic quality that seemed to shift and flow as the observer's perspective changed, incorporating mathematical principles that several watching instructors recognized as advanced harmonic theory. Dr. Helix 9 reported findings that challenged fundamental assumptions about intelligence and creativity. The collaborative pattern demonstrates complex mathematical relationships that neither species should be capable of understanding independently. The human's spatial reasoning combined with the HFY's intuitive flow concepts has produced something that transcends the sum of its parts. As the extended evaluation continued, word spread beyond the Academy to the broader galactic community. Diplomatic observers from dozens of species requested permission to witness the unprecedented interspecies cooperation. Military theorists began reconsidering assumptions about conflict resolution that had guided galactic politics for millennia. But in the arena itself, Sarah and the Cub remained focused on their creative collaboration, seemingly oblivious to the cosmic implications of their artistic partnership. They had found a common language that transcended the barriers of biology, evolution, and instinct, proving that intelligence and creativity could bridge any gap when approached with patience, understanding, and respect. 3 hours had passed since the evaluation began, and the Academy's daily schedule had been quietly abandoned as the historic encounter continued. The arena had become an impromptu laboratory for xenobiological research as scientists from across the station arrived to document what was rapidly being recognized as the most significant breakthrough in interspecies communication in galactic history. Sarah and the HFY Cub had progressed from simple artistic collaboration to complex problem-solving exercises. Using nothing more than floor scratches, gestures, and vocalizations, they had developed a sophisticated communication system that allowed them to share increasingly complex concepts. The Cub demonstrated understanding of abstract mathematical principles, while Sarah displayed an intuitive grasp of HFY spatial reasoning that astounded xenobiologists. Dr. Helix. 9 had been joined by a team of specialists who monitored both participants with advanced neural imaging equipment hastily brought to the arena. The data they were collecting rewrote textbooks in real time as both human and HFY brains showed unprecedented cross-species neural synchronization patterns. The level of cognitive resonance we're observing should be impossible, reported Dr. Keth Vaughn, the galaxy's leading expert in comparative neurology. These two beings have achieved a form of mental harmony that we've never documented between members of the same species, let alone different evolutionary lines. Admiral Karoth had been contacted by the Galactic Council's Xenobiological Research Division, who were sending an emergency team to study the phenomenon. The implications extended far beyond military training into the fundamental understanding of consciousness, communication, and the nature of intelligence itself. In the arena, Sarah was teaching the Cub a game she called pattern prediction. She would create the beginning of a geometric sequence using floor scratches, and the Cub would complete the pattern. What started as simple exercises had evolved into incredibly complex mathematical relationships that challenged even the Academy's most advanced theoretical mathematicians. The Cub's artistic abilities had also expanded dramatically. Its latest floor sculpture incorporated three-dimensional elements created by varying the depth and width of its claw marks. The resulting artwork possessed a dynamic quality that seemed to change based on the viewer's position and the angle of light hitting the scratches. It's learning at an exponential rate, observed Dean Threxenel, his multiple eyes tracking the subtle variations in the Cub's artistic technique. Each new concept the human introduces is being absorbed, modified, and improved upon within minutes. This suggests a form of intelligence that we've completely underestimated in predatory species. Sarah had begun introducing more complex concepts related to human philosophy and ethics. Using their established communication system, she was explaining ideas about cooperation, mutual respect, and the value of preserving rather than destroying. The Cub's responses indicated not just understanding, but active engagement with these abstract concepts. The breakthrough came when the Cub spontaneously created a floor pattern that clearly represented both participants working together. The design showed two distinct forms, one human-like and one HFY-like, engaged in collaborative creation. When Sarah expressed delight at this representation, the Cub added additional elements that transformed the scene into a story showing the progression of their interaction from initial caution to creative partnership. It's developed narrative thinking, whispered Dr. Helix, 9 to the research team. The Cub is not just understanding the present moment, but creating representations of temporal sequences and cause and effect relationships. This indicates a level of abstract reasoning that approaches human cognitive capabilities. The Academy's Communications Center had been overwhelmed with requests from across the galaxy for real-time data feeds from the evaluation. Representatives from the Galactic Council, the Interspecies Cooperation Initiative, and dozens of academic institutions were demanding access to what was being called the most significant scientific discovery since faster-than-light travel. As news spread, the political implications became impossible to ignore. If predatory species previously considered unintelligent could achieve this level of communication and cooperation with humans, every assumption about interspecies relations would need fundamental revision. Military doctrines based on species hierarchies, diplomatic protocols assuming communication limitations, and economic systems built on the premise of unchangeable species characteristics all faced potential obsolescence. Sarah seemed unaware of the cosmic significance of her actions as she continued working with the cub on increasingly sophisticated exercises. They had moved beyond simple communication to genuine intellectual collaboration, with each bringing unique perspectives to shared problems. The cub's natural spatial intelligence complemented Sarah's systematic analytical approach, creating solutions that neither could have achieved independently. The most remarkable development came when the cub began showing protective behavior towards Sarah. When a research technician approached the arena too quickly, the massive predator positioned itself between the perceived threat and the human, though it made no aggressive moves. It had clearly begun to consider Sarah as part of its social group, an unprecedented development that challenged everything xenobiologists thought they knew about XOR pack dynamics. The cub has essentially adopted the human into its family structure, reported Dr. Keth Vaughn. This suggests that the barriers between species may be largely artificial constructs based on limited understanding rather than biological imperatives. Instructor Zethka had been analyzing the tactical implications of Sarah's approach throughout the extended evaluation. His military experience recognized that she had accomplished something that went far beyond successful threat neutralization. She had transformed an adversarial relationship into an alliance, turning a potential enemy into a protective partner. The strategic applications are enormous, he reported to Admiral Karath. If humans can establish this level of cooperation with species we considered inherently hostile, it suggests possibilities for conflict resolution that we've never explored. The human hasn't just passed this evaluation. She's demonstrated an entirely new approach to military engagement. The extended evaluation entered its fourth hour as Sarah introduced the cub to the concept of teaching others. Using their established communication system, she explained how knowledge and skills could be shared to benefit entire communities rather than just individuals. The cub's response was immediate and enthusiastic, leading to an impromptu demonstration where it attempted to teach Sarah some of the spatial reasoning techniques it had developed. The reversal of teacher and student roles provided another breakthrough in understanding. The cub proved to be a remarkably effective instructor, using visual demonstrations and patient repetition to help Sarah grasp concepts that her human brain was not naturally configured to process. Within an hour, she was creating spatial patterns that incorporated XOR design principles, achieving artistic effects that no human had ever produced. We're witnessing the birth of a truly interspecies culture, observed Dean Threxanael. They're not just communicating across species barriers. They're creating new forms of expression that combine the cognitive strengths of both evolutionary lines. The collaborative artworks they produced during this phase incorporated mathematical principles from human analytical thinking with the flowing, organic design concepts natural to XOR consciousness. The resulting patterns possessed a beauty and complexity that transcended anything either species had achieved independently. Admiral Karath made another historic decision as the evaluation approached its fifth hour. Rather than ending the session, he authorized the conversion of the arena into a permanent research facility dedicated to studying interspecies communication and cooperation. The academy would pivot from its traditional focus on military training to become a center for developing new paradigms of galactic interaction. What we're witnessing here will change the fundamental nature of civilization, he announced to the assembled observers. This human cadet has demonstrated that the barriers we assumed were absolute are actually permeable with the right approach. Our responsibility is to understand and develop these techniques for the benefit of all species. The cub had begun showing signs of fatigue as the extended session continued, but its enthusiasm for learning remained undiminished. Sarah recognized the creature's need for rest and began introducing calming techniques, teaching it meditation and relaxation methods that humans use to recover from mental exertion. The sight of an HFY cub engaging in meditative breathing exercises under human guidance provided yet another moment of paradigm-shifting revelation. Dr. Helix 9 sensors detected the creature's stress hormones dropping to levels indicating deep relaxation, proving that contemplative practices could be successfully taught across species boundaries. If we can teach predatory species to achieve meditative states, mused Dr. Keth Vaughn, the implications for conflict resolution throughout the galaxy are staggering. Aggression and violence may not be inevitable characteristics of certain species, but simply the result of never having learned alternative approaches to stress management. As the session moved into its 6th hour, Sarah and the cub had achieved a level of communication that approached telepathic understanding. They could anticipate each other's thoughts and intentions with remarkable accuracy, working together with the smooth coordination of beings who had known each other for years rather than hours. The Academy's most senior instructors found themselves reconsidering not just their teaching methods, but their fundamental understanding of what education could achieve. If a human cadet could establish this level of rapport with a creature previously considered unteachable, what did that suggest about the untapped potential in all species? The evaluation that had begun as a simple combat test had evolved into a revolution in consciousness, proving that intelligence, creativity, and compassion could bridge any gap when approached with patience, understanding, and respect for the unique capabilities that each species brought to the galaxy's vast community of minds. The 8th hour of what had officially become known as the Chun Protocol was drawing to a close when the moment everyone had been dreading finally arrived. The HFY cub, despite its obvious affection for Sarah and their remarkable collaborative achievements, was beginning to show signs of instinctual stress. Its natural circadian rhythms were asserting themselves, and with the onset of what would have been its evening hunting period, primitive responses were starting to override the higher cognitive functions they had been developing. Dr. Helix 9's sensors detected the shift immediately. Neural activity in the cub's predatory centers is increasing. Stress hormones are elevating rapidly. We may be approaching the limits of how long higher cognitive functions can suppress evolutionary programming. Sarah had noticed the change even before the sensors registered it. The cub's body language had become subtly more tense. Its breathing had shifted to a pattern she recognized from her xenobiology studies as pre-hunting preparation, and, most tellingly, it had stopped making eye contact during their communications. She had been expecting this moment and had spent hours developing contingency plans. "It's all right," she said softly, her voice carrying the same calm confidence it had maintained throughout their extended interaction. "You're getting tired, and when predators get tired, they revert to instinctual behaviors. That's perfectly natural. There's nothing wrong with being what you are." The cub's head turned toward her voice, but its eyes had taken on the focused intensity she recognized as hunting mode. The transformation was gradual, but unmistakable as millions of years of evolutionary programming reasserted control over learned behaviors. In the observation gallery, several instructors moved closer to their intervention controls, though none wanted to be the first to end what had become a historic demonstration of interspecies cooperation. Admiral Karath faced an impossible decision: allow the session to continue and risk the safety of a cadet who had achieved something unprecedented, or intervene and potentially destroy a moment of scientific breakthrough that might never be recreated. His military training demanded cadet safety above all other considerations, but his recognition of the broader implications made him hesitate. Sarah seemed to understand the tension in the observation gallery as she continued her calm conversation with the increasingly agitated cub. I know you're confused right now. Part of you wants to hunt, and part of you remembers everything we've shared today. That conflict must be very difficult to manage. The cub began the slow, methodical approach pattern that characterized XOR-high hunting behavior. But this time, there is a noticeable difference in its movement. The approach was less decisive, interrupted by frequent pauses as if the creature was fighting an internal battle between instinct and learned behavior. You don't have to fight those instincts, Sarah continued, moving slowly to maintain distance while keeping her voice gentle and non-threatening. Hunting is part of who you are, but you also don't have to hurt me to honor that part of yourself. We've learned too much together to let it end in violence. In the observation gallery, Cadet Vex, 12, was processing the encounter through multiple analytical frameworks simultaneously. The cub appears to be experiencing cognitive dissonance between its instinctual programming and the social bonds it has formed with Cadet Shin. This conflict suggests that learned behaviors can coexist with evolutionary imperatives rather than simply suppressing them. The cub's approach continued, but its body language remained conflicted. It would take several steps in classic hunting posture, then pause and make vocalizations that sounded remarkably similar to the contented rumbles it had produced during their artistic collaborations. The internal struggle was visible to everyone watching. Dr. Kethvon was recording neural data that rewrote understanding of predator psychology in real time. Both cognitive systems are active simultaneously. The cub is not reverting to pure instinct, but rather attempting to integrate hunting behaviors with social bonding behaviors. This should be neurologically impossible. Sarah reached into her utility kit one final time and withdrew something that made several observers gasp in amazement. It was a small piece of synthesized meat, standard rations from her emergency supplies. She held it up where the cub could see and smell it clearly. You're hungry, aren't you? That's what's driving the hunting response. But you don't need to hunt me to satisfy that hunger. I can share food with you just like we shared art and music and learning. The effect was immediate and profound. The cub stopped its approach and tilted its head in the curious gesture that had become familiar throughout their extended session. The scent of food had triggered recognition that its hunger could be satisfied without violence, offering a pathway to resolve the conflict between instinct and learned behavior. Sarah placed the food on the ground halfway between her position and the cub, then stepped back to give the creature space to approach safely. Food shared freely tastes better than food taken by force, she said with a smile. Humans learned that lesson long ago. The cub approached the offered food cautiously, sniffed it carefully, then consumed it in a single bite. But instead of triggering intensified hunting behavior, as everyone expected, the feeding seemed to calm its instinctual responses. Fed predators were typically less aggressive, and the act of receiving food from Sarah reinforced their social bond rather than establishing dominance hierarchies. Remarkable, breathed Dr. Helix 9. By satisfying the biological need that was driving the hunting response, she has allowed the learned social behaviors to reassert dominance over instinctual programming. The transformation back to collaborative behavior was swift and complete. Within minutes, the cub had returned to the relaxed, curious state that had characterized most of their interaction. It approached Sarah with obvious affection, making the contented rumbling sounds that had become their signal for mutual pleasure and satisfaction. Admiral Karath realized he was witnessing the resolution of what many had considered an impossible scenario. The human cadet had not only survived an encounter with the XOR-high cub, but had transformed it into a demonstration of how intelligence and compassion could coexist with natural predatory instincts. She has solved the fundamental paradox of interspecies relations, he announced to the assembled observers. How to honor what each species naturally is while creating space for what they could become together. The final hours of the session became a celebration of interspecies friendship as Sarah and the cub collaborated on their most ambitious artwork yet. Using everything they had learned about each other's cognitive capabilities, they created a floor sculpture that told the story of their encounter from first meeting to collaborative partnership. The artwork incorporated elements that could only be fully appreciated from multiple perspectives, requiring viewers to move around the arena to understand its complete narrative. Human geometric precision combined with XOR-high, flowing designs to create something that was recognizably the product of two distinct forms of intelligence working in perfect harmony. Dr. Frexenal's analytical capabilities were stretched to their limits as he attempted to catalog the innovations they were witnessing. The collaborative techniques they have developed represent a new form of communication that transcends the limitations of both species. This is not just art. It is the birth of a genuinely interspecies culture. As the session officially concluded after 12 hours, Sarah and the cub had achieved something that redefined the possibilities for galactic civilization. They had proven that the barriers between species were not absolute walls, but rather bridges waiting to be built with patience, understanding, and mutual respect. The Academy's evaluation protocols would be completely rewritten based on the Chun Protocol. Instead of testing cadets' abilities to overcome adversaries, new programs would focus on developing skills in interspecies communication, cooperative problem-solving, and the transformation of potential conflicts into collaborative opportunities. Sarah's graduation from the Academy 18 months later was attended by representatives from every major species in the galaxy. The XOR-high cub, now officially designated as her permanent partner in the new Interspecies Cooperation Corps, had grown into a magnificent adult whose intelligence rivaled that of the galaxy's most advanced synthetic beings. Together, they traveled to conflict zones throughout known space, demonstrating the Chun Protocol techniques for resolving disputes that traditional diplomacy had failed to address. Their success rate in transforming adversarial relationships into cooperative partnerships approached 100%, leading to the establishment of interspecies cooperation centers on thousands of worlds. The phrase, "nice try," became Sarah's signature response to situations where others saw only impossible challenges. It captured her fundamental belief that every apparent barrier was simply an invitation to find a better approach. Whether facing down aggressive pirates, mediating territorial disputes between ancient enemies, or teaching xenophobic species to appreciate diversity, her calm confidence that solutions always existed inspired countless beings to reconsider their assumptions about what was possible. The Galactic Military Academy erected a monument in the arena where the first Chun Protocol session had taken place. The inscription, written in over 400 languages, read simply, "Intelligence and compassion can bridge any gap. All beings possess the capacity for growth, understanding, and cooperation. The barriers we perceive are often the bridges we have yet to build." But perhaps the most lasting legacy of that historic day was the transformation it brought to the concept of strength itself. Across the galaxy, military academies began teaching that true power lay not in the ability to defeat opponents, but in the wisdom to transform them into allies. The greatest victories were achieved not through superior force, but through superior understanding. Sarah Chun had entered the Academy as humanity's first representative in galactic military education. She graduated as the architect of a new paradigm for interspecies relations that would guide civilization for generations to come. Her approach to the impossible had become a template for approaching every challenge with intelligence, creativity, and an unshakable belief that there was always a better way forward. The cub that had lunged at her with predatory intent had become living proof that evolution's programming could be enhanced rather than opposed, that natural instincts could coexist with learned wisdom, and that the phrase, "that's just how things are," was always an invitation to discover how things could be better. When beings across the galaxy faced seemingly insurmountable challenges, they would remember the story of a human cadet who looked at an apex predator and saw not an enemy to defeat, but a mind to engage, a potential friend to understand, and a partner in building bridges across the vast spaces between species. In those moments of doubt and apparent impossibility, they would hear her voice saying with quiet confidence, "Nice try," and know that there was always another approach waiting to be discovered.